Joining me now is Dinesh D'Souza, conservative commentator and author of United States of Socialism. He also has a new film coming out called Trump Card. Also with me is Cynthia Garrett, who's the founder of Cynthia Garrett Ministries and author of I Choose Victory. Dinesh, we were told for years that the culture wars were just a waste of time. And a lot of economic conservatives, fiscal conservatives, said just focused on the free market and capitalism. But at this moment in time, we see why they were so important. Just focusing for a moment on education and what's happening to our education system. Explain.
A lot of the thuggery, the gangsterism, the knocking down of monuments, the unlawful occupations that we see around us, all of this is reflecting the radicalization of academia over the past couple of decades. One could almost say that academia is the theory and Antifa is the practice. And initially the attacks were on the Confederate monuments and people kind of looked the other way. But it's really interesting to see how quickly they've metastasized into attacks on Washington, attacks on Jefferson, and I think most tellingly, attacks on Abraham Lincoln. Because right away we have a puzzle. Here's America's greatest president, the guy who freed the slaves. And why pull down his monument? Why go after him? I think the answer is that the left secretly hates Lincoln because Lincoln was actually very effective in unmasking the Democratic Party. Lincoln said very significantly about slavery, it's you work and I eat. So for Lincoln, slavery was a kind of economic confiscation, and Lincoln saw that as the core principle of the Democratic Party. Well, fast forward 150 years, and what's the core principle of the left and of the Democrats today? Economic confiscation. You work, I eat. So I think the hatred of Lincoln is that Lincoln had the number of the left, he had the number of the Democrats, and he represented in some ways not only the Republican spirit, but the American spirit.
Cynthia, you've seen what's been happening in recent days and weeks. And I think a lot of people have, I think, righteous anger. And I don't blame for a lot of people for being angry at what they're seeing. I don't blame them at all. But the education system and what's happened inside the education system, especially to young and underprivileged kids. I know you've written a lot about school choice, how that's lost in this equation. Tell us about it.
Well, it's completely lost. And the reality is that I think this whole 1619 project and all of this is a red herring. I think the real issue is that they want to give us as African Americans miseducation, and what we need is good education. And that's why I write so much and so passionately about the fact that we really need to focus on dismantling this mess of a public school system that poor Black and brown communities have, and then give the parents the choice. Let parents invest in their children's lives. Our mind is our capital. Blacks want to own businesses and want to participate in this great country. And I think that, you know, focusing a bunch of energy on getting rid of a bunch of statues as if that's going to validate and help anybody learn to do something to advance themselves is ridiculous. It's like choosing to live in a victim's narrative rather than look at the victory. As a matter of fact, if we're to be dealing with education and getting rid of statues, why don't we put all that energy into focusing on more Madam C.J. Walkers and more Jesse Bingas and more Reverend William Randolph Brown, a former slave who in 1888 started the first Black bank in his home. In 1889 in Washington, D.C., he was given his bank charter. Why don't we learn what we can do? Why don't we focus on educating whites and Blacks about the achievements that we've had? Because then young people wouldn't be so hopeless. Because all I've seen, it's not anger and rage, Laura. I've seen hopelessness when I look at the television. It's hopelessness. And why? Yeah. What can you hope in if you don't think you have a life?
And I think you raised such a good point. There are so many wonderful stories about the American experience. We're not perfect. Nobody is. No country is. But Dinesh, you've written about it. Cynthia's written extensively about this. And yet it's all spray paint land, burn, smash someone in the head, a bad cop story. And that's what is seething inside of young people. Instead of, this is what I can do if I work hard, stay out of trouble, actually just some common sense, which we all, I mean, I could use sometimes, this common sense. But I want to read something from the Fairfax County Public Schools in Virginia, very important school district right outside of D.C. Headline, we need to have a radical transformation, okay? Their plans for fall take equity anti-racist curriculum. Okay, we need to have a radical transformation, a paradigm shift, as they said many, many times yesterday, toward anti-racist philosophy, as opposed to all of us constantly saying we're not racist. And that's the chairperson, Sujatha Hampton. Dinesh, this is the kind of education, mumbo jumbo that satisfies people symbolically. But does it create a single educational opportunity or business opportunity for young underprivileged kids?
They're not even serious about what they say. One figure who could teach them a lot about racism is, in fact, the greatest black American of our history, and that would be Frederick Douglass. But Frederick Douglass's name never comes up. Why? Because he was a champion of what he called the self-made man. His idea was that the best thing you could do for blacks is to leave them alone and watch them build up their own industries, their own families, and so on. Interestingly, in Chicago, there's a tall statue to a man named Stephen Douglas, Abraham Lincoln's rival. Douglass was a champion of slavery. In fact, he made slavery the centerpiece of the ideology of the Democratic Party. His statue untouched. But Lincoln is under attack. That's because the Democrats ultimately prefer Douglass's ideology of enslavement to Lincoln's ideology of liberation.
15 seconds, Cynthia, and we gave you short shrift. We'll have you back. Are you hopeful about the future, given what you've seen just over the past month? Are you still hopeful?
Look, I mean, I'm hopeful because I'm a woman of faith, and at the end of the day, I thank God I'm in America and American, because I travel all over the world to countries all over the place who have so much less than we do. But again, that's about education. We need to really and truly wrestle out of the hands of people that have. I mean, look, the publics, they've had enough time. They failed, all of us. You know what I mean? They failed. Like, we've got to radically change our education priorities.
And Cynthia, we're going to pick up where you just left off, because we're going to go right here to LA Unified. And thank you both for joining us.